name is Sharon Serrago, and I am going to show the absolute beginners how to start an art painting of watercolor. I'm going to start with the boards that you're going to use. We'll show how to prepare your paper for your first layer of paint. And eventually I'm going to go through an entire series of design theory and color theory. But today I want to work just with those people who are beginning watercolor and let you know some of the very basic fundamentals about how to get started. The first thing that we have to do is have a support. This is called gator board. You can see that it's hard when you knock on it. It is not paper. It does have a foam core in it, but it is not the kind of foam core that you can buy at like Hobby Lobby or Michael's or one of those places. You have to get this at an art store. So you could buy it in this local area in Dallas. You can get it from Azel Art. You could get it online from Cheap Joe's, from Dick Blitt. There are many art supply houses that you can buy this from online, and they call it gator board, but it's very hard. So you want to be sure that you can knock on it, because when it gets wet, if you buy anything else, it would be permeable, and that means the water would eventually soak into the surface, which would allow waves to happen on your watercolor paper. You never want that, because it's hard to control watercolor in the first place. And if our paper is not absolutely flat, then you get puddles of water in there that you can't control. So step one is to get a support for it. Now, it wouldn't have to be like this. I have some other things that you could use. Let me see if I can find one real quickly. Okay, so I have several other options than this gator board. That's my preference. So this is a play board that you can buy, but basically it's just the back of this pressed wood that you could get at Home Depot. This is nothing more than a piece of cardboard. Well, yes, it will bend, it'll tear, but I have put shelf paper on it. Now you might want to put a couple of layers of shelf paper on it, but it would still keep your watercolor from folding up into waves. Alright, here's the other one. This is actually a piece of very light wood. Wood is permeable, and over a period of time, as you can see that I used to paint on this side, but then the board started warping, which is no good for my watercolor. And so I put shelf paper on it again, and then I'm set to go. Now, the disadvantage of all of these right here is that you can't staple the paper down and keep it flat. So if you're painting on wet paper, then without stretching it, then it's going to have little bubbles in it, and they're going to want to pop up. So it is possible for people to use masking tape and tape it down on these, but for me it's not as advantageous as getting that paper wet, letting all the bubbles go out, soaking it up, and then it eventually lays flat, and then I can staple it down. And when it dries, it will be absolutely flat until I take those staples out, and then it's a flat sheet of paper ready to hang. We're going to start with this piece of gator board that I showed you earlier. And they generally come in the same size, a little bit larger than a watercolor paper. So this one measures 32 inches that way and about 24 inches this way. So I'm going to mark it off so that I can cut it straight in half here. And I'm just going to work on a half sheet for you today because of the time element. Now, you do need to use an X-Acto knife of one sort. You could use one of these, or you can have a smaller one like this. So, because this one is a little bit heavier and it's just easier to hold, I'm going to use that. So all I need to do is score this about 3 times. I do not need to go all the way through this thing. I just want to get it started, and then I'm going to pop it so it'll break. So here we go. I'm not pushing extraordinarily hard because I'm going to do it a few times until I can break through that top layer. And I think I'll go, I'm having trouble right here at the edge. There we go. I'm going to go one more time just to make it easy on me. You'll be surprised how easy this is when you do this. Alright, so I've gone through 4 times, and I can tell when I did that I'm going through this first layer. If you look real carefully at this, you'll see, well maybe you cannot, but this top layer right here is fairly thick, and then you have the foam core, and then you have another thick piece right here. And I have already scored through that very top layer, but I haven't touched the foam. So, this is the side that I drew on. I'm going to turn on this side, and I'm just going to do like a karate chop. Just like that. Okay? And now I have a half a sheet of watercolor board. Alright, this is a package of, I think it's 25 sheets of arches, but it's a French paper. This is how you spell the word. You can buy this at any art supply house. And it's very good paper. This is 140-pound cold press. It makes a difference. There are many other kinds of paper, but as a beginner, you want something that you're able to make mistakes on and then correct them. Arches is very, very forgiving. So if we make a mistake on it, it's fairly simple to correct it. If you're using some of the other papers, it's hard to correct mistakes. So while I certainly will use those later on in the series, when we first start with beginners, I would advise you to use only arches. I also would advise you to use only sheets of paper and not the pads. So we have to have this to match this. So it's the same thing. Those boards are generally a little bit larger than the watercolor paper. So I'm just simply folding this in half. Now, I could cut it. A lot of people do. Some people like to have the edges of it still like they're torn. Like you see these edges right here. Some people like that effect. And so they don't want it to look cut. I always frame my work. I very rarely float it in a frame, so these edges never show up on my work. But a lot of people love to float them, so you have a choice. In the very beginning, you could do either way. So I'm going to take my trusty little knife here, and I'm just going to cut that so that it happens very quickly. And you know, this thing right here is getting in the way, so I think I'll use this one. And I am not pushing hard. I'm just trying to score that crease that I have already created. And then I'm going to fold it back the other way and do the same thing on the other side. And then when I tear it, hopefully it will tear much easier. So you see, I'm not trying to cut it through all the way. I'm just trying to make it easier to tear when I decide to tear it. So we go that way. Be sure that you pull this way. Do not try tearing it like that. Pull it this way. It's not quite as easy as it looks, is it? Of course, if you turn it back and forth, you know, a dozen times, then of course it'll be easier. So now you can see that my paper fits right on this board, and I will be very happy. And the other thing I have to tell you, you have to be sure that your hands are absolutely free of all kinds of stuff. So before you start handling your watercolor paper, you should go wash them with soap and water. If you have hand lotion on there, you will ruin your paper. If you have suntan lotion or sunscreen or something that you put on your hands and you think, well, it's dry, it will ruin your paper when your hands get wet, because the oils on your hands will touch this wet paper and it just sucks the oil right up, and you can never paint over it. You'll have fingerprints all over the place. So you want to be very careful of that. If you have real oily hands, I would be careful about touching it in the beginning stages anyway. My hands are not real oily, so I'm not really concerned about it right now. But when it gets wet, I have to be very, very careful. A lot of times people will get their paper stretched and put the first layer of paint on it, and then it has little spots on it, and they say, oh my gosh, what's wrong with this? Well, it's your fingerprint. Okay, so here we go. I'm just picking any brush, and the object is to wet both sides. Well, this goes pretty slowly, doesn't it? I mean, how long would it take me to wet both sides with this? So you can spritz it if you want to with water. I like doing that. Oh, I have a sink over there. I could have just taken the thing and stuck it in the sink and let it get wet that way. So if you have one that's large enough, you can do that. Even that looks to me like it's going to be kind of slow here. And so what have I got here? A trusty sponge. And oh my gosh, look how much water it holds. And so then I can do it really fast. So there's a whole lot of ways. Bathtubs are very nice for this also. Just put it in the bathtub, let it stay there for about maybe 2 minutes, not too long. You don't want to let the sizing get off of it because then it's very hard to paint on. When you do this, do not press your sponge down hard. You will wipe off the stuff that's on that paper that makes it watercolor paper. So it has to be very lightly done. And then we're going to turn it over, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm just putting a lot of water on there, and I'm letting it soak in. And the object is to let it get really, really wet on both sides. So I'm going to turn it over one more time and be sure that the other side is wet also. And when you do this, you need to be very careful that you do not yank this up, because then you will be stretching the paper and you'll never get that stretch out. So be very, very careful about it. And we can lay it down, and I'm going to go at it one more time. You can still see the glisten on it, but I'm going to try again. And then I will move over to a brush, because this sponge, as nice as it is, has left all kind of little things on it. If we have these things on it, then it'll show up under your paint. So we do not want that. It needs to be clean. I need to just dry my hands off, because I need to be a little bit more careful now. So what I'm doing right now is trying to get rid of all of this sponge stuff that I've put on there. Now normally I don't use that sponge. I just spray it or put it in the sink, but I wanted to show you a bunch of different ways to do it. And of course there are sponges that don't shed. It's like a dog. Or my cat. I have 2 cats that have long hair, and my goodness gracious, they shed. And they love to love on me, so the minute they get up in my lap, I'm a hairball. So I'm still just picking up these pieces here. I'm almost done. And then I have to turn it over to the other side. Okay, so I'm on the other side now, and I'm picking up the last remains of that sponge that decided to leave part of its character on my paper. Alright, now the important thing here is that we let this paper sit long enough so that there are no bubbles in it. And you're going to see in a moment, this paper is going to spring up with a bubble. And we can't have that. So I'm continuing to add water any place that it looks like it's trying to dry too quickly. And I'm waiting to see, here's a bubble coming up right here. Can you see that bubble? Alright, so we're going to try to wipe that out. It's kind of like contact paper. When you put contact paper down, there's always a bubble in it. Well, I can't push it over to the side, so I'm going to have to very carefully lift this up and then be sure that that air pocket is pushed out, because this paper has to lie flat before I staple it down, or every time this thing gets wet, I'm going to have that bubble pop up on it again. I'm just continuing to wipe it down to be sure that everything is wonderful. Looks like it's good. So now I could staple it. I could also start painting on it right now. And I think I might like to do that. I would like to put just a little bit of color on this before I even start to staple it. And that way I can see still if I have any bubbles. So I'm going to put a little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue, and a little bit of red. So I'm going to put a little bit of this quinacridone gold on it. This is Danielle Smith's quinacridone gold that I love. I'm just going to put it in different places. My paper's wet, and I want it to stay wet. I want it to have really soft edges. Then I'm going to put some blue down. This is Mayberry Blues Cyan. I really love it, but any this kind of blue will work. So I think Winsor Blue has the same color. There's some Daniel Smith, Winsor Newton. All of those are good paints. What you don't want is a student paint. It has to be a really professional paint in order for your paper to look good. And then comes something that will be qualified as red. Now, of course, it's a little pink, but this pink looks really good. Notice that I'm trying to leave whites in this paper. I absolutely do not want all of this paper colored. I need to keep some white in it. And I'm going to turn it different ways and let that kind of run so that I don't have any real hard edges there. And you can see it running right here, how beautiful that is. Then I'm going to turn it this way. But if you have some white in your watercolor paper left, then you have some choices. You can see it run. You have some choices about how you want to finish it. We may have the paper and there not be a bit of white left on it. But I don't have a choice if I cover it all right now. So I definitely want to have a choice. So this is what I want you to do for this first project. Get your paper, cut it, get it on your board, wet it, and then put this first layer of 3 colors on it. Now, it doesn't have to be these exact colors, but it does need to be something that would pass in the red family, like this is in the red family, something that would pass in the yellow family. This could have been a brown, a deeper color, and something that would pass in the blue family. So think of the words red, blue, and yellow rather than the absolute color. Of course, we know this is turquoise and this is pink. This looks pretty nicely yellow, but think about those first. Okay, so I'm going to staple this down now. Some people don't staple it as close as I do. My experience is that if I have about an inch in between, yes, I have a lot of staples to pull out, but my paper stays absolutely flat during the entire process. Alright, so there we go we have a board. We have a sheet of watercolor paper that's good, arches. We've wet it on both sides. We've totally saturated it until it lies flat. Then we put some colors on it. We chose 3 colors, red, blue, and yellow. Those are our primary colors. You can see that they're going to blend together, make a little green there, and I think that's just fine. And then we've stapled it down, and we're going to dry it, and then we'll come back and we'll start talking about design theory and what we're going to put on this. Okay? I'll see you at the next one.